Hello.
Okay. Good morning, all of you brave souls who managed to get here early. We've got Lou Jepsen here, who is working on, I think, one of the most exciting projects happening today. I would say anywhere in the world. I think the word disruptor is thrown around a great deal, and most of the time it's little disruptions. And actually, with open water, Lou is creating something quite extraordinary. So I would love you to talk a little bit about what your vision is. The open water.
It's a big vision. It's really big. It's communicating with thought. It's the next step in computing, I think, is right now we're limited in how fast we can type and how fast we can move our mouths. And the idea of being able to share what's in our brain with each other and intertwine our brains and with the computer is the big idea. So that's the big moonshot idea.
That's for sure.
And the incremental products on the way can disrupt healthcare. The reason healthcare is so expensive is the technology has gotten better. It keeps us alive longer, but it's gotten so expensive, many of us can't afford it. And so along those lines, it's funny, it's on the monitor here, I've got a picture. Is that okay to show
Absolutely,
it?
bring it on up.
Oops, there we go. What we're also talking about doing is putting in the functionality of this big multi-million-dollar MRI machine into a consumer electronics wearable that anyone can afford, that can allow you to detect cancer, clogged arteries, internal bleeding, neurological conditions, and so forth. And those products that we make, a bra to detect breast cancer, a bandage to detect internal bleeding, or a cap to allow better treatment of mental disease or neurodegenerative disease, are our incremental products on the way to telepathy.
So how did you come to be captivated by this whole idea of MRI and then begin to dive deep into the physics of it to begin this problem? What was the instigating moment?
It's interesting. It's been something I've been gnawing on for years, but I went to MIT in 2005 to become a professor. I'd spent the year at Intel as the CTO of the display division, and convinced Intel to shut it down. And it was the most difficult professional year of my life up till that point. And at the end of it, I thought, I have to get out of industry. I can't take it. I went back in later. But I ended up at MIT as a professor trying to work on this very problem of telepathy and how to do it. But it took about a week, and I co-founded One Laptop Per Child with Nicholas Negroponte and realized I could design a $100 laptop and have this really direct impact on, hundreds of millions of children that we did have in just a few years. And so I did that and let go of it at that time. And I keep coming back to it. And this time, I've left Facebook and started a company whose sole purpose is to do this.
And so you have a real history of looking at something and imagining kickstarting something extraordinary. So with a $100 laptop per child, you kickstarted the whole
right
laptop
at that time
tablet.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
laptops were $2,000 and too expensive for the developing world. And in a typical LDC, the bottom 50 countries as defined by the United Nations in terms of GDP per capita, in rough numbers, about a third of the teachers that are paid to show up. The next third are illiterate. So you have 1/3 of the teachers actually showing up trying to do right by the kids for their 4 hours a day from when they're 8 until they're 13 and they graduate. And essentially that school is learning how to sing, memorize, and exercise. But if you could get kids electronic devices on the network, we can leverage the kids themselves. By definition, 1 in 100 of us is a genius. And that's great. They can figure out how to use the devices. And once one figures out, they teach the other kids. And they get this access to information, creation, conversation, a window out to the world rather than just we do it that way because we always did it that way, you know,
Right.
like you get to see other alternatives. And if you have one laptop per child, you have one laptop per family. So that was we started a nonprofit as a professor at MIT that ended up with $1 billion of revenue. I mean, you talk about these unicorns, and like we actually had the revenue and catalyzed $30 billion of revenue for our for-profit partners. And at that point, I thought, what am I doing at MIT? There aren't enough MIT professors sleeping on the factory floors of the world to figure out how to use these very advanced manufacturing processes to create things that can skip several generations. So I moved back to Asia and continued to work on device physics. And I'm applying all of that to this problem.
Absolutely.
And really, to come back to open water, most recently I was running advanced development for VR and AR at Facebook and Oculus. And we've gotten manufacturing improvements into the big $10 billion fabs in Asia that make screens and optics and optoelectronics that can enable really small pixels. And that's necessary for the next generation VR, that when you put on, here at South by Southwest, it's really hard to walk 100 feet without any VR headset.
Yeah.
So I hope all of you in the audience have tried them on, but it's really, when you take a cell phone and look at it, it looks very crisp in terms of the resolution in pixels, and you take that same amount of pixels and spread it out through your whole visual field, you need more pixels. So you need smaller pixels, higher density. So that's going into the manufacturing process improvements that are coming down the pike, baked in. Everybody wants it to make VR a big product, but it occurred to me that we could use that manufacturing process improvement for something far bigger.
Absolutely.
To transform medical imaging, healthcare, and telepathy. And so that's actually why I left Facebook, because it was a really great job, but you only have one life to live, and I thought, you know, everybody's doing VR now. All the brain cells in the world and consumer electronics are on that. No one's seen this, and it's time. It's the way, you know, to have impact.
So take us through how we're going to go from this giant MRI machine, of which many of us have been inside and had that difficult experience and very expensive experience. Take us through what this is going to look like, what you imagine, and a little bit about how it works.
A ski hat. And so the principle is actually, I've designed a lot of innovative screens for the past 30 years, not to date myself too much, but that's about how long I've been inventing different types and shipping different types of screen technology. And so the idea here is to take the screen and line it on the inside of a ski hat or a vest or a bra, and use invisible light, near infrared light, not UV light that causes, you know, skin cancer, but benign near infrared light that your body is translucent to, and modulate the light through this high resolution LCD to be able to look for tumors, blood, clogged arteries, and thought itself, to read and write the state of neurons. And so it's an odd use of a display, but I can explain more how the physics works if you want, but...
I'd love it. Do you have any images to show us a little bit?
I do,
about
yeah.
Well,
so
do a little of that, because
so here's an image of your body being translucent to near infrared light. Infrared light is in the sun, it's all around us, but we can't see it. Our eyes can't see it. But you can with an infrared camera or like night vision goggles. Those allow you to see it. But your body is translucent to it. And in fact, infrared light is used in a product you've probably all tried in the audience, which is a little clothespin they put on your finger if you're ever in the hospital or sick, and it looks for the oxygenation, how much oxygen is in your blood. And it uses a little infrared LEDs and a sensor. And basically, your blood changes color depending upon how much oxygen is in it or not in it.
And this is what it sees, essentially.
And this is what it sees, is this scattering of your body. And so here you see the vein structure, and it's hyper-colored. So those colors mean something. But your body's translucent to it. But here's the deal. Your body scatters it. So you can't get much resolution of any kind of depth. People have been trying for a long time to use near-infrared light to see details of structure in the body, but it's very hard for anybody to get more than a few millimeters of depth. And so that's interesting for, you know, dermatological conditions and things, but not to see deep inside your body.
So how did you hack it?
So
What's the hack?
all right. So the breakthrough.
Yeah.
So the breakthrough is, let's see. So so I've been thinking we can do this by, usually in MRI, what you use is this big, huge magnet, and the cost keeps going up. To get higher resolution, you use bigger and bigger magnets. So the unit of measurement for a magnet is a Tesla, not the car company, but the 19th century scientist who that unit of measurement. And so you had one Tesla magnets, then 3, and now we have 7 Tesla magnets, and they're bigger, and they're more expensive, and they're really precise, huge magnets that are expensive to make. Yeah. And the innovation cycle isn't changing. So I was really focused on making better magnets, not bigger magnets. And every time I thought I had it, it failed. And then I saw this paper, and this is work from a group at Washington University in St. Louis. And they used infrared light with this huge fiber optic wig to image. They got to a couple centimeters of depth using infrared light and match the resolution of functional magnetic resonance imaging. And this was about 2 years ago.
It's like those old permanent things that you do, like from I Love Lucy or something.
Yeah. So I saw this and I was just floored. I thought, wow, this is optics. This is my thing. I did a PhD in optics. Like I know all about optics. I ship a lot of screens. I thought, boy, these guys are great, but they don't know much about consumer electronics, because that you're not gonna. Okay, I guess you could ship that. And actually they've slimmed it down. I've visited them, but like that doesn't. I don't know, that's not your iPhone moment. It's great technology, it's extraordinary basic physics, the neuroscience is really great, and I realized, wow, I could do something different. And so,
I was going to say, it's not up on the screen, but let's go ahead and do the next one.
It's not up on the screen. Oh.
There it is. Okay, great.
That's the fiber optic wig that we're talking about. It's not. I guess you could ship it, but it's probably not going to hit $1 billion in sales. No. And it's not going to dramatically decrease the cost the way that you're talking about. Although I Love Lucy might have tried it.
That's true. Absolutely. Yeah.
It's a good point. It could become fashionable. And so the big insight I have is holography. By making these small pixels, the small pixel size, the small feature size needed for next generation VR, we can get to actually make fully computed holograms. And by holograms, it's a confusing word, because holography could be like Tupac appearing on stage in Las Vegas. That's actually, the real term is Pepper's Ghost for that. Microsoft has a product called Hololens, which is its VR augmented reality product, and it's its marketing term, using the word holography. Yes. But I'm talking holography, the thing that Dennis Gabor won the Nobel Prize for in 1971, and that is enabled by recording both the intensity of light and something called the phase. And don't get scared, phase is really easy. We call light waves. The phase is like the ups and downs, the peaks and troughs of the waves. And when you have pixels approximately the size of that wavelength, you can record whether you're up or down, or going up or going down on the phase. And that ends up mattering a lot. And the way you record that phase is you create a holography setup, this thing that the guy won Nobel Prize in Physics in 1971. And to do that, you create an optical setup that records something called standing waves. And standing waves actually aren't that scary either. If you've ever plucked a guitar string, you see those little nodes? Those are kind of like standing waves. We just create an optical setup that does that. And the wavelength is much smaller. It's in visible light, it's half a micron, which is super small. Infrared is a longer wavelength. So what we're looking at is making pixels the size of a wavelength so we can record holograms. I haven't told you why you care about holograms yet. And this is why you care about holograms. Our body is scattering the light. If we record a hologram, we can record all of the light, the entire wavefront, every detail of every angle of that scatter, all at the same time in a hologram. And then holography has this other incredible property. You can invert, it's called phase conjugation, conjugation, like if anybody ever took French or Spanish, you conjugate verbs. Sort of like that, except you invert the hologram.
The transformation of the
not the verb.
Okay.
He, she, we, all that, right?
Yeah.
But it's phase conjugation, and so what you can do is invert the entire wavefront and neutralize that object and make basically that scatterer or whatever you're taking the hologram of transparent. So now we just got rid of the scattering of our body, made it totally transparent. Now we can just pick off, okay, is the light, is the color of the blood changing? Is there a tumor? Is there an artery that's clogged?
Is there no blood at all?
Is there no blood at all? Right, all of these different things. Can you see your baby as it's growing while you're pregnant? You know, is the head up or down? You know, all tons of different applications.
Like you would in an MRI without any of the side effects that you would experience.
It's just an LCD with a little bit of infrared light, lower than the amount that you're exposed to walking around on the streets of Austin. Yesterday it was sunny. Right. Today I'm not sure, but.
And what's it going to look like on our bodies? You mentioned ski hat and you mentioned bandage. Can you share?
Yeah. So the idea is basically using very slim LCD technology with backlights, with light guide plates, so they really do line the inside of clothing. So we're working on the clothing, of course, but right now we're working on the boundaries of the basic physics. So just to be sure, like what we're saying is replacing the cost of this multi-million-dollar huge room size, smaller than this room, but this is a big room, huge room size magnet that costs millions of dollars with an LCD detector, some infrared light, and big data, hardware, software, AI, the tools of our time. And so we can sew that stuff into like a ski hat or a bandage and so forth. And here's some pictures from some of our first patents. Our first patents went straight through, approved to issue.
Love that.
No changes at all. Totally brand new idea, very novel. And
So when you see something like this, you talk about the average cost of an MRI now in the US is $2,600. And the MRI machine is multi-million, takes $1 million a year to run.
Right.
And what you're talking about is something where you're taking the cost of a consumer electronic like your phone. And so when you're talking, this time frame is what? Did you say 3 to
8 years? So we're in development right now, and we're looking at the bounding box of the physics. We'll ship the first ones. They won't be the cost of the cell phone. We'll probably charge more. But in volume, it's using the components in consumer electronics, and it's a really good time to do that because there's been very little innovation in consumer electronics since the economic crisis.
So since 2008,
there's one company.
Just keep churning things. Okay.
There's one company that executed extraordinarily well, Apple.
Yes.
And then everybody else just played catch up, and all innovation, and it feels like we're at the end of something.
Yes.
Where you have the valuations of most of the consumer electronics giants halved in the last 18 months, because everybody's got a smartphone at this point. We've saturated. And for the first time in the last 20 years, I have the CEOs of these gazillion-dollar companies coming to me and saying, tell us what to make next. We have no idea. And they're in a lot of pain. I'm like, okay. Healthcare's too expensive. Yeah. We've got this empty consumer electronics, capacity, and let's make wearables and medical devices that aren't just pedometers. Like I bought my first pedometer from Edmund Scientific as a kid in 1972, and I was like, okay, now it's online. Really,
let's do more than count our steps.
You don't need to use off-the-shelf components. So really change the device physics so that we can look and solve the real problems. Like brain disease is by far the biggest expenditure for any healthcare system in any country in the world. 1 billion people suffer globally from debilitating brain disease between neurological conditions and disease and mental disease. And the therapies for that haven't changed much in decades. They maybe get an MRI once a year, but we could do much better directed therapy with these devices.
So you can do sort of continuous monitoring and diagnostics as well as actual
Yes.
I was going to say function,
yes.
but it's not. Actually,
continuous monitoring to see
treatment.
effect, and you can do treatment. We know that even applying infrared light to Alzheimer's patients keeps the neurons alive and regenerates neuron growth. Rather, what happens in Alzheimer's is your neurons die, so you know, you fade away. And so that already is an approved therapy. I want to say Germany, in one of the European countries. But it doesn't go very deep, and it's very diffuse. But we can focus things down, and we can also, you know, start to operate that way, start to focus in on neurons and change the state of neurons. So, you know, learn French en route to Paris, or I can just transfer all I know about optics and electronics to anyone in the extreme, anyone in the audience, and we can exchange each other's knowledge, and just I can learn all you know, and we can share our knowledge so that we can keep our jobs. We'll be smarter than the AIs.
Well, that's a great
and more effective and more creative.
I just realized that I did not make an announcement in the beginning that you can go on Slido. Hashtag South by Southwest to ask any questions that you want, because we'll be taking questions shortly. So if you go on Slido South by Southwest, hashtag South by Southwest, you can tee up your questions. I'm looking at this and I'm listening to what you're saying, and I'm thinking it's like a thinking cap. You'll be able to be wearing a thinking cap both for diagnostics as well as for ongoing kinds of therapy, as well as now let's get to the next iteration, which is this sort of thought-to-thought interface, as you talk about.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm wearing a thinking cap, you're wearing a thinking cap, it's 10 years from now. This whole open water project has gone swimmingly. We've gone swimmingly. We've gone from a $2,600 MRI in the first world to an MRI at the cost of a phone call. Right. And what's next? I'm wearing a cap and you're wearing a cap, and what might I be able to do?
Well, to start, we know right now today, if I put you in an MRI machine, or if I put you in an MRI machine, I can tell you what words you're about to say. I can tell you what images are in your head, tell you what music you're listening to. I can tell you if you're paying attention or not. Actually, I can tell.
You need an MRI for that.
No. But whether you really get the implications of this. And so if you can dump, just to start, the images and the words you're about to say, that's very helpful for a stroke victim or Parkinson's or so forth. But if you can dump the images in your head, it's interesting, we're in a big movie festival here at South by Southwest.
Yes.
Can you imagine a director being able to like dump a rough cut for the whole movie directly to the computer? Just rather than hiring difficult actors and dealing with like raising $1 million just for the rough cut, like just the creativity that we can unleash in that way. Right now, it's a very small baud rate out of our brains that's modulated by moving jaws and tongues for speech and fingers for typing or writing. And yet, 70% of our brains are allocated for processing visual information. Most of us think visually, and language seems to be the add-on to it. What if we can transcend language?
Visual.
You know, we can communicate with people that speak different languages, because the language doesn't matter. And I've been thinking a lot about math. As I walk around South by Southwest, I usually go to much more, I'm just going to say it, technical conferences, and I think, you know, math and science, it's so linear the way you learn it in school, that if you miss one key module, it's very hard to keep advancing. Yeah. Yet so much of math, the construct, I'm trying to think of like the grammar of programming or of math, of where you put the symbols and what the Greek letters mean, doesn't matter. We visualize it. It's
so abstract, and you're talking about how you keep it from being an abstraction.
Yeah, I read a biography of Faraday, not Faraday the companies, but the 19th century scientist who unified electricity and magnetism and made the most profound discovery in physics and in math in the 19th century, and he couldn't do math. He couldn't even do algebra. His work was written up by Maxwell in the form of Maxwell's equations, yet he visualized the math. And if we could have more people just skip the nomenclature of it, and let's just get everybody up on math and science, we could do so much more. Again, like, and then if we share it with each other, we can teach it. Like, when I took electricity and magnetism, I just saw all these swirling electric and magnetic fields around each other, really beautiful. I'd dream in it and be a little part of it. It was really, that's how I think of it, not in terms of the math, and I think it really keeps people away from it.
Yes.
And I think many of the complex problems can be visually thought of, and we can share them so much easier in that way.
So you can start with these visualizations. Literally, you've got an artist brain, an
and
artist
so that's just the output. Then we have the input. Right now, we're at 10 centimeters of depth with our system, 100 micron focus. If we get to 10 microns, we can get to individual neurons and literally implant thoughts. As has been shown with probes, people working in this area are mostly doing invasive approaches where you put needles in heads, people's heads. It's approved for use for deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's, but mostly like mice and chimps and things like that. And one experiment that was done is a mice runs around a maze, figures out the way through a maze. The electrical states of the neurons are taken and then implanted in another mouse that's never seen the maze.
And he runs it the same way.
Mouse number 2, straight through the maze, knows where to go.
Wow.
I mean, astonishing. And then astonishing with what you can do with sharing thoughts. I saw a wonderful talk from Miguel, I cannot think of his last name, Miguel at Duke, who does brain stuff. Sorry, Brazilian guy. He had 3 monkeys with all probes, just, again, invasive, trying to play a video game together by moving their eyes around. And they were much better together than separately. Then he blindfolded 2 of the monkeys, but still their brains were tied together.
And they could all work together.
And they could all work together, and they still played the game. They used one of the monkey's eyes and the other. So just, as we think of this and our brains sort of swimming together, what will we do? But there are tremendous implications for privacy and ethical concerns. But there's also this notion of how we can enhance ourselves. Again, like everyone thinks AI is going to overtake our lives and we're going to be the house cats and whatever. And this argument's been going on since the 50s, since the term AI, artificial intelligence, was coined by John McCarthy and Marvin Minsky, and there's probably a few that I'm not crediting, but then immediately a group of people said, well, I don't want AI, that's going to change everything. I want IA, like intelligence augmentation. And those people went on to found the personal computing revolution, invented the mouse and the Doug Engelbart, the mother of all demos, which was essentially the Macintosh in the 60s, but it was bigger, but really this really cool user interface that allows this enhancement. And it feels like we're at the end of that right now. That's why the consumer electronics industry is in such disarray, because everybody's got smartphones now, and they're glued to us, our eyes are glued to them.
Yeah.
And so this seems to be what's next.
So then when we talk about what's next, and you've touched on this concept of thought-to-thought interface and of people sharing and of downloading everything that you know directly into my brain, which I would happily have your brain in my brain right now. I'm delighted to have that. So once you get that, particularly given what's going on in the world right now and this move towards hyper-nationalism and things like thought police, and what do you imagine that, or how can we move forward? How can we help to think about what all might be involved in this? We are sharing thoughts. We are being able to see your thoughts. We're being able to see my dog is wearing your little ski cap. Can I? Does
your dog love you, or is it hungry?
I don't care, right? It loves me because it's hungry and I feed it, right? It's like sort of. But it's an interesting, it is a brave new world that you're talking about, and very exciting from all kinds of perspectives.
Which is why we're talking about it early. Actually, a mutual friend of ours, Peter Gabriel, the rock star and human rights activist, called me every week for 6 months trying to convince me to quit Facebook as I was starting to really dig in and figure out how to do this. because Facebook's great. I loved working for Facebook. They paid me very well. VR and AR is very exciting, but the ethical implications and the legal implications of privacy and going through this barrier where I have thoughts I don't always communicate. We probably all have had things that we thought about people that we didn't say to them. Have you ever thought about sex or violence and not communicated it to the person?
And we all lie all day long, too, don't we? Something like 200
We all
lies.
hear 200 lies a day. So
Mm-hmm.
this is a social lubricant, and it varies by culture. We're sort of mid-range for that. And so the first devices that we plan to ship at Open Water are most likely going to be medical.
Yes.
Seems very important to bake into the technology ethical concerns from the start, because where we're going is clear, and in terms of telepathy and brain-computer interface. And in fact, not just us. When you have the national academies of most every developed country on Earth saying of the top 5 priorities that technologists can work on to really have big impact in their careers, reverse engineering the brain is on that top 5 list.
Yes.
Yet we're not talking about what happens when we achieve that. Do you own your thoughts? Can you delete your thoughts? Can you put filters on your thoughts? So you have the sex filter and the violence filter and the I'm thinking of my
Parental
kids
filter.
and what I'm having for dinner filter, whatever,
All
you know,
these
I
filters.
really want coffee, I've got a splitting headache, like things that you don't really want to tell in that big meeting that you're having, like you got yourself there. We were saying just showing up is like
Absolutely.
actually hard some days, and really TMI, too much information. You don't want to let it all out.
Yes.
And so how do you do that? But then also, you know, can the police make you wear this hat? Can the military make you wear this hat? Can your parents make you wear this hat? Can you make your spouse or significant other wear this hat? And so can we design the hat in a way that it only works when you want it to work? Or do we teach people how to lie in it? Is that ethical to teach people how to lie into the hat?
Or they'll teach themselves. They'll figure it out.
Or do we teach everybody to go into like deep meditation kind of thing? And so these are the questions, and we're trying to open up that discussion now, because we are publishing the fundamental of how the technology works and building those devices, and we want to bake it in at this level, even though we're, I think, about 8 years away from shipping devices like that. We might be able to bring that in, and it's a gradation. Like maybe this stuff will come out first for people that are brain dead. We know that 40% of people thought to be brain dead are not brain dead. They could communicate with their loved ones. There you might just turn off all the filters, whatever, you know.
Whatever,
like,
I want to hear from you, whatever you have to say.
to say goodbye to your loved ones, or to keep them alive as we develop better technologies to do
So
that.
how can all of us in this room and beyond, is there a way that we can participate? Is there something we can do to aid and abet this whole process? The idea about making MRI kind of technology and diagnostic ability and treatment ability available is really exciting and feels like something we'd like to support you with, as well
Yes.
as thinking about.
So we're trying to open up a community for 2 things. We're trying to open up a community for that, and we'll roll something out, I think, this summer on the discussion of the use and the ethics and the legal stuff globally, not just Austin, not just U.S., not just West, but it must be a global discussion of what is the right thing to do, what is the responsible way to approach this technology, and what are the ways to thwart misuse of this technology. It's very easy to think about, you know, some government
All the things
agent
that can go wrong.
using it in Guantanamo on who knows who, you know, and that doesn't seem right. And so then strategically, how do we deal with that? So that's one thing that we're going to open up this summer. And the other is we're going to pick probably about a half dozen early access partners that we discuss how we're going with the physics and decide together what the first products are, and we'll get prototypes to those partners.
More from the medical side of things. So you've got the sort of ethical side of the community thinking about that, as well as the medical
and that might be developing world stuff, or some of the big hospitals, or some of the insurance, and we're figuring that we can't. We're small, so one of the problems, it's sort of Groundhog Day-ish. In one laptop per child, we were two professors starting this thing where we had 200 heads of state that wanted to see us, Kofi Annan, and we're just two people, and it's really hard. It takes like a week to do a head of state trip because you got to meet the ministers, you got to get there. And so what we had to figure out how to do is how to take the help. And so you have to grow from very, very small to the size where we can do that. So we're growing, we've got job descriptions on our website, Open Water. We're just starting it, but the reason we're talking about it is really, I think, for me, I first saw it from Peter Gabriel, the profound ethical and legal implications as we go past this barrier to privacy. It's important to talk about it as we're developing and develop it in the open. And I also do believe, my considered opinion from being in .com.edu startup land, this is my fourth startup, is for brand new technology, the best structure in the world is a startup to do it. So we have a startup, the number of startups from 2 years ago to now is half. And the amount of funding is double. So it's actually a really great time to start a startup. And it enables this open conversation with the public about what we're doing, and encourages other people, because there are other things happening in brain-computer interfaces. And that sort of divides up, I like to call it like the meditation mindfulness group of people that are largely using EEG, which has like no resolution. But you can see a rest state, and there's remarkable things being done with it.
Those are little nodes that are in a little cap right now.
Yeah, the nodes of the cap.
A little band.
Yes, there's a band. There's a bunch of different. There's some good stuff there, but they don't have much depth. They're actually very interested in adopting our technology to get more depth. And then you have, I guess I'd say how Paul Allen, the founder of Microsoft and the founder of the Allen Brain Institute, named after him, and says fabulous work. As he describes it, the basic research, the 5 Nobel Prizes, just to understand how a neuron works. And so that's like a lot of people doing the deep probes in the brains and using the chimps and the monkeys and the mice and humans. I mean, there's therapies for humans with this. But, and the optogenetics, where you bind molecules to the neurons that turn blue, and you can excite with blue light and change the voltage, but you've got to get blue light in, and unlike IR, your body is opaque to visible light. That's why we look solid. So it's invasive. And then there's this sort of fringe group that Elon Musk has popularized in the last year, and there's different people working on it, but I'll call that neural lace, and that's the idea of injecting silicon nanoparticles into your bloodstream, and they infuse with your brain and body and make you into a cyborg.
Silicon in your bloodstream seems a little invasive to me, and dangerous.
Yeah. So I do an injection every day, and because I
but not of silicon.
But not silicon. If I didn't have to do that, that would be great. And so this non-invasive approach that you can take off, that's not in part doesn't become part of your body, seems clear to me to be the right way to go. And I think there's a lot of interest from all of those groups actually in what we're doing. They hadn't seen how to do it non-invasively. And I think using the near-infrared, the benign near-infrared light is a pretty exciting approach. I'm getting a lot of good collaboration from groups in all of those areas, and it's just a wonderful time. But I think many of them, particularly in academia, the whole system about getting the papers out and not overstating what you're doing, and it doesn't allow them to talk about directionally where we're going and what our responsibility is.
Well, that's also interesting why when you have a private sector, a startup, gives you a chance to begin to imagine a timeline or blue skies. In academia, you have to be able to prove everything. So you're in a place that you can't speculate in the same way that you can when your mind imagines what can happen 3 to 8 years from now.
Yeah, we're at the beginning. It seems we're at the end of something in terms of consumer electronics, but at the beginning of a next generation biotech revolution. If you look at also that Jennifer Doudna spoke here, keynoted here, the inventor of CRISPR-Cas9, which has profound implications for genetic manipulation. So, you know, we can make mosquitoes that don't carry malaria, but then they can, you know, evolve themselves into who knows what. And so, what we need to do is make sure that they don't. And so the implications of changing our DNA to get rid of diseases and so forth are really powerful. But then what else are we going to change? Are we going to make ourselves also kind of cyborg or
well, I think
$6 billion man?
If it's easy enough to edit the way it looks to be, like it looks like you're editing in a doc, where you're slicing out letters.
Yes.
It's like, why wouldn't people want to begin to experiment with it and get into the whole DIY kind of thing? But
sure.
I want to open it up. Do we have our Slido questions? We can open up to the audience of other additional questions we've got. What will education be if we don't have to spend time absorbing information at school?
We should
really
never
fun.
be
Really
absorbing
fun,
information at school. We should be learning, you know, how, why, not as much information, but it should be, you know, how will that transform? I'm a, you know, disciple of constructionist learning by doing, but then what can you do when you put all that brain power in kindergarten together? What projects can you work on? What stuff? It should be quite transformative to education in the long run. I think that will probably take the longest.
Yes.
But is the most impactful because we look at what some human beings are able to do in educating themselves. Can we bring all of us to that level of Stephen Hawking? I don't know, pick a genius.
Yeah,
there's fantastic. A lot of geniuses. Can we all get to that level? I remember watching Star Trek: The Next Generation when I started MIT, and everybody was jealous of Wesley, and he was a 13-year-old doing nuclear physics. And I was like, why can't 13-year-olds do nuclear physics? Can we get them to that point where they're ready to do that by getting them all the other education in elementary school, so they get to middle school and they can, you know, get a job, be productive, and do really interesting research? Wouldn't that be great?
I think it's fantastic. Will we be able to read human emotions with this text? And not just the thought, but actually the feelings.
We already are, just by looking at oxygenated blood flow in fMRI. And that's really the interesting thing. Paul Allen's 5 Nobel Prizes for the neuron is correct. But just with fMRI resolution, this has already been shown by dozens of groups using the big multi-million MRI machines today.
So think about falling in love, like Helen Fisher's work about in the MRI, madly in love. And the blood flow in the brain.
Love. Yeah.
Now, what about the regulatory burden as you're moving this through the open water and this low-cost MRI technology through the regulatory process? How do you intend to speed that up as quickly as possible? You think it'll be like the patent? Nobody changed the patent and it breezed right through? Is that?
Yeah, well, it depends for FDA, for example, and equivalent in other countries. It depends what the claims are. And I've been spending a lot of time with the medical device crowd lately. And last year was the 25th anniversary of the invention of optical coherence tomography. If you've ever been to the optometrist, it's the picture that they can take of your retina in very high res. And you can see this little dimple where your fovea is. And that was invented 25 years ago. They didn't do FDA approval. They just said, these are images. And they didn't make claims. So that got them into a lot of research places first. But they, of course, I think what we're going to have to do is probably some products that don't require it, and then some that will. And obviously, above all, we want to keep this safe and be responsible about the rollout of the technology. Some may just require CE because they need to be safe to ship them. If we don't make claims, we don't need. It depends what the claims are, but obviously we want to go for the big stuff. We want to go for for working on improving people's lives. People are dying. We can help them live longer. Like right now, if you just think about the impact in the developing world of this technology,
Yes.
we have 50 MRI or 40 MRI machines per million people in the US. Japan has that density as well. You get to Mexico, just a couple hours south of here, there's 2 MRI machines per million people. You get to your typical African country, there might be 1 in the capital city. People are dying because they can't get early diagnosis of all kinds of conditions. And couple that with, there's been some really interesting experiments at Johns Hopkins and I can't remember if Cedars-Sinai or Sinai's in New York. One of the big hospitals.
Mount Sinai's in New York, Cedars-Sinai's in LA. Yeah.
All right, so one of them's doing hospital at home, the one in New York, and their mortality and morbidity rate is dramatically lower. But they can't do surgery in the home, and they can't do medical imaging in the home. They can send doctors there, they can take blood, they can do so much stuff, and guess what? People live longer and are much happier in their home. Can we enable that? And then imagine having this in ambulances and clinics, especially in the developing world. They can't afford even the electric or the, any of the maintenance required for the big iron multi-million-dollar stuff. So,
and the technicians all around being able to use them. Well, one of the things
Right.
I think we talked about is that with the MRI is way more effective than the mammogram. And yet people can't afford mammogram with what's all going on in the healthcare
we know
crisis in this country, much less in the rest of the world. You've about 500,000 people dying of breast cancer every year.
1 in 8 women will get breast cancer. 500,000 women die every year. There might be a few men that men do have breasts, but they're usually smaller.
Yes, hopefully.
I don't know what I'm saying. But the breast scatters, the breast scatters, mammography isn't effective for 40% of women who have something called dense breast tissue. Guess what that means? It's dense. The light scatters, but we know how to invert the scattering by taking a hologram of this. So actually, I was talking to our mutual friend, Natalie Jeremijenko, who's really big in working on a bra with this technology and thinking, yes, everybody would love to have a bra over a certain age when they are more susceptible to breast cancer after having some risk factors in their lives. And so can we do that? Can we replace that? Because MRI would be a better diagnostic for breast cancer, but we don't use it in any country in the world, not just the US, which is arguably less efficient than other countries, but in any country, even the efficient ones, because the cost structure is too high.
Indeed. So what if we talk about, will this open water technology be able to enable writing to the brain as well as reading from it?
Yes. If IR hits a neuron, we change the action potential of the neuron, the voltage down the neuron, and we can change the state of the neuron. So what we're trying to do is see what kind of depth and what kind of focus we can get. When I first started the company in September, I was only getting like a couple inches of depth and a couple millimeters, but now we're at 10 centimeters, 100 microns, which is a 1/10 of a millimeter. We want to get to 1/100 of a millimeter, because then you can really read and write individual neurons. But even groups of neurons are effective can be quite effective and impactful. So yes, reading and writing, and then think about that in terms of surgery. Like, you can take pills, or nanoparticles, pills, that selectively bind to cancer cells, that then can be activated by IR, that we can focus down, that will then send those cells into cell death, apoptotic cell death. It's a cycle. And so what we want to do is...
What's that?
Oh, there's
a person at the microphone.
I thought you had a camera right there. I was thinking you were taking a close-up.
No, I was just waiting. Could I ask a follow-up to the education and the writing questions?
Yes.
Really, this is about speed and capacity. How long does it take, do you think, to emplace an idea or something that we would regard as an educational concept? And secondly to that, do we have any idea what the upper limit of the brain is? Are we limited by the total number of neurons? So am I suddenly going to find 5-year-olds with all of Wikipedia, and then what do they do for the rest of their lives?
Yeah, and are they weighed down by that? So these are the right questions, and they're the exact right questions. Come join us. Like,
I'd love to,
we don't know the answers to them, I think. And you know, understanding the brain is as scary as it is from an ethical and legal point of view. It's fundamental to who we are. And understanding that seems important to understand ourselves and make ourselves better, but we have to clearly look at that. But yeah, we think there's 100 billion neurons. Each neuron can possibly connect with 100,000 different neurons. And so the human brain is by far orders of magnitude more complex than any computer we know how to make. And so the limits of it, there are these great, I don't know, it's Mozart, the limit of it, I don't know the limit. There are these extraordinary individuals we can look to in history who have achieved these great things, but can we all get there if we can learn more about how it works? And we're not the only thing with brains on the planet, and we could collaborate with, you know, these animals with extraordinary smelling systems, or we saw the bats here in Austin last night. They've got this cool sonar. Can we leverage and collaborate with them is another question. You were asking, I think the first part of your question was about education and thoughts and what we can implant. And I think the most we know about that with real hard data is through the electrode implanting. And maybe you get 100 electrodes, so you're hitting 100 neurons. The interesting thing about neurons is they fire together. So if you get one neuron, you can get a cluster, and so you can get, this is a little bit of an exaggeration, but a more complex thought, if you will, or group of neurons firing, if we can call a thought a group of neurons firing, which I think we could spend a whole other session debating. But the question is, as we are able to do far more than 100, to do 100 million neurons in parallel, how many do we actually have to do with those 100 million, and how can we share these thoughts? But again, right now, just with oxygenated blood flow of an fMRI system at 10 cubic millimeter voxels, those are cubes. 10 cubic millimeters is about 3 by 3 by 3 millimeters. I might have that a little wrong, but anyway, about the size of like a half-carat gemstone. Just imagine that as a cube. Imaging that, just looking at the use of oxygen in the brain and applying big data and AI over a learning period of a couple hundred hours, we're able to extract images that people are thinking of, words that they're thinking of, emotions from their head. And it's pretty uncomfortable to lay in an MRI machine for hundreds of hours. It's easier to have a hat. The whole East Coast is wearing hats today. Here it's snowing. You know, like, we could leverage all of that data, if we can do it responsibly, to learn more about, well, we have not yet. We will, again, responsibly, yes, if is maybe the right word, so that we can understand how our brains work, and also other brains. Your dog.
I love that.
Octopuses, stuff like that. They're supposed to be smart.
Thank you. Dare I say that's been mind-blowing? I appreciate it.
We've got 2 more questions standing up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the wow moment. That's great. That's fantastic. I like the idea of the cap you can remove, so you're partly in control. And it's funny because in other conferences, you know, there were all this debate about how we master AI and things like that. But apparently, with your talk now, we are switching debate because with this hat, with our brain, we'll be much better equipped to control the machine. It's just a matter now how we exchange between brain. But at least we are between human, so to speak. So there might be machine in the middle. But so are we shifting a debate which did not take place, which was how man control AI? And then now we go to a new debate about how we discuss between brain or whatsoever.
Yes, I agree. I think you're right. I think we can move that AI discussion. We'll have our jobs. We'll become smarter than the AI. So yeah, it's the, you know,
it's very hopeful.
We're very resilient as animals. I think that we can make it, and we can use all this great AI technology and robotics and 3D printing to be able to get our ideas out and prototype and go through things faster to solve the really big problems of the world, the environment, education, healthcare. You know, these are things we struggle with, and with more understanding of how we think and amplification of it, and amplification of all the great work the AI people are doing.
Absolutely. Next question.
Very exciting.
Yeah, hi, thanks so much. Question is about linguistics, semantics, and the translation between neural transmission and conceptualization and actual language. Do you have any insight into whether or not we're going to find that the actual structural organization of the brain morphs differently in different languages, and whether or not there's a universality of the abstraction of a thought into an actual language, cross language?
Right. There's a lot of interesting studies going on about this right now. The one I get to see the most on is just a geographic benefit of being across the bay from Jack Gallant's lab at University of California at Berkeley, who's using fMRI right now to look at the word maps of people's brains and to be able to extract that out. And these are the right questions, and I think I know I've already met you at this conference, you're studying this as well, and yeah, I mean, is language the thing that made humans so successful compared to the other animals, or is that just been so fundamental, and is that really key, and is it how different our brains are arranged as a function of the language that we speak? They're really interesting questions. I speak Chinese because I sleep on the factory floors of the world, and we lost our manufacturing infrastructure in the West, so I go there. So yeah, I think anybody that speaks multiple languages will tell you they think differently in the different language, and I think there's a lot of indication of what you're saying, yes, but I think it's also early days. I think so much of the literature presents the experiment and says this may mean this, and then you see a paper you see this a lot in medical, you see a paper the next month or the next year that presents a different experiment and sort of has the opposite conclusion. So I think, there's a strong indication of what you're saying, but we need to get further along to see that. Is my guess, to be able to definitively say. But it certainly looks that way.
Next question.
Hi. Firstly, I'd just like to say I think your vision is really inspiring, and I think what you're doing is really great. My questions are, firstly, how do you achieve the depth? I think you mentioned about 10 centimeters or so, and such great resolution using open water. And secondly, how do you get around the problem of near-infrared light being so strongly absorbed by hair?
Right. So yes, near-infrared light, hair and skin are the big absorbers, not bone. And so that is actually in the design of the cap, where there's little soft needles that come out that can touch close to it, and then we can through the hair, also through air is the other issue. And so it's a matter of engineering the cap to hug very well. And there's been, luckily, a lot of work done in this by the Diffuse Optical Tomography crowd, which is the big fiber optic wig, an example of that, actually a pretty breakthrough example of that. So that I think we have somewhat handled in the work, for example, of the diffuse optical tomography work that's been going on for decades. The other part of the question was, how do we get the depth? Because diffuse optical tomography, the way diffuse optical tomography works, the other use of infrared light to see inside of your body, is the light is so scattered. The principle is basically saying, imagine, if you will, light as like, I'm trying to think of a good thing to have, one of those things they used to do the lottery on, with those ping pong balls bouncing around in a sphere. And imagine rays of light going through. You can have a ray of light shine right through and not hit a ping pong ball, but most of them are going to hit the ping pong balls and then ricochet all around. The one that doesn't hit that ping pong ball, and then the ping pong balls, which is my metaphor for the scouring of our body. The one that goes straight through, we call that the ballistic light, and it gets through faster. Not that the speed of light of that ray is faster, but that it has a shorter path because it hasn't had to ricochet around. So that's what's used for the normal diffuse optical tomography, and to differentiate the speed of light with something that's not gone straight through requires a very fast detector. And that detector is noisy. It has something called shot noise, which is fundamental to the speed of that detector. It makes it low resolution. You also throw away more than 99% of the light because all that stuff that's ricocheting around doesn't give a good image. The secret to getting a good image is to not have scattered light. I'm wearing glasses. I can't actually see you right now because my glasses are a little bit scattering, but if I rub them with sandpaper, I couldn't see you at all. And so that's why X-rays are used. X-rays are not scattered by your body. That's why magnetic resonance is used, because the magnetic fields remain straight through. And so with the way infrared imaging has been used to date, largely, it's by taking that fast light through and rejecting everything else, and that only gives a certain amount of depth and a certain amount of resolution. But by computing a hologram of the scattering, recording a hologram of the scattering of your body, and then computing the inverse and shining light back through, we completely neutralize that scattering and make your body effectively transparent. And so that's really the difference in being able to get that depth. And that's enabled by the manufacturing process improvements that are giving us small pixels for the next generation VR and AR systems. But I'm switching the wavelength into the near infrared. And also the device architecture is quite different. I designed device physics. And for a screen that faces into your body, you actually don't care if there's some bad pixels. You're not going to see them in your eyes. You don't care about the contrast ratio. You don't need red, green, and blue. You don't, it's totally different architecture. What we do need is fast computation in chip, because your body's moving all the time. So we record these holograms, compute the inverse, this phase conjugate thing, and then your body moves. Your body here moves more because you're breathing. Your body moves here more mostly, it's blood flow, perhaps a little shifting of the hat and so forth. And so there, we do the computation, a lot of the computation actually on chip. And so a phase conjugate is actually pretty easy to compute. Like say it hits at like 5/4 pi, then or 3/4 pi, or 5/4 pi, then you do like 8, I don't know, I'm thinking of a bad number. You actually compute say, I'm in a bit of a, if you say you want to flip the pi, say you're 7/8 pi, you go to 9/8 pi, something like that out. And you compute that throughout the system, pixel by pixel. But that's actually just a couple transistors, and they can go behind. And so transistors, I can make as many, I can put down the mask however I want. I can lay that silicon mask and those metal masks above and make whatever transistors I want. I've been doing that for 20 years, so it's something I'm very comfortable with, and I've been doing it with the Fabs of Asia for that long. So that's how we get through it and use an LCD to neutralize the scattering.
Great. Let's go through one last
Sorry, that was
question.
sort of technical.
Way down the rabbit hole. It was great.
Just wanted to say thank you.
Okay, and last question from the audience, and we have one more, and then we'll finish up.
I have a question. Because you're working with an optical system, and because some people don't think in language. They think in optical systems. They might think in visuals. They might think in auditory, music, in many other ways. We have translated everything through a verbal system because we're most used to it. My question really has to do with the interpretation of what you're actually getting out as information and how you can distinguish and come to know what somebody is really thinking or doing, not just by brain flow, but by the optical visualizations that you're perceiving, and how sometimes that can be misinterpreted if you're going through huge data sets. How do you know that what your interpretation is actually what they're experiencing?
Well, Sally, Sally taught me how to make my first hologram in 1983, so it's really great. We go way back. She lives here. She's a holographic artist here. So it's a great question. I think that comes to the ethics issue. And so what we envision in its early days right now is it just first a personal productivity tool to amplify excellence in these dimensions of music and art and visual and so forth, and how people think, and then they tune and train it. So the artist themselves uses it, and they're the only person that sees it, right? And we need to make sure we've got really great crypto to keep that, and we train the system. But as we go further, what you're talking about also becomes an issue because it's misconstrued. The thoughts are not your thoughts. And so it's a really great question for ethical and legal considerations because of mistranslation.
Well, all data can be interpreted as the viewer wishes, depending on how you want to flip it. And that's the danger of it. And so that's, you know, it is a squeaky zone. And I think what's brilliant is that you're asking those questions at the very beginning.
Yes.
Instead of, because you can't ask them later. You need to ask them now, and I think that's so important.
Bake it into the technology
Exactly.
now as we develop it. So, yeah, we do have, I mean, we are open, we are going to start something. We'll try to put everybody that came here on the list, and you can delete it, or maybe we should do it the other way. We'll figure out a way to not offend.
info@openwater.io.
Yeah,
is how you could
info@openwater.io
reach out to be part of this. So we have to
is
wrap
how you
up
can
right
get
now.
on the
Thank
list.
you so much.
Thank you so much.
Sparrows on the windowsill.